Hi, my name is Olivia Nelson, and I am doing a report on Paulo Freire. Paulo Freire is known to be one of the most influential educators of the 20th century. He spent most of his life trying to end worldwide illiteracy and the oppression of the uneducated. Most of his theories and ideologies are on the earth today. Paulo Freire was born in Recife, Brazil on September 19th, 1921. This was actually during the Great Depression, and his father died, so they grew up in poverty. In his later years, he's attended the University of Recife in 1943. Then, once graduated, he became a secondary school teacher. There he met his wife, Elza Maia Costa de Oliveira. He spent many years working on different educational projects, which included working for United Nations, Harvard, etc. After this, his wife actually passed away, and then he was remarried in 1986 to Ana Maria Arroyo. Then he passed away in 1997. So, as we know, Paulo Freire grew up in poverty, and this actually gave him great insight for his future educational standpoints. And actually, while he was teaching in the high school, he was placed in charge of eradicating adult illiteracy in that area. During this time, he also began to embrace a very non-orthodox form of education. This includes a term which he actually coined, and is not a real word. It's not in any dictionaries I could find, but it's called conscientization. It's a process by which the learner advances towards taking action against the oppressors of society. He also changed around liberation theology, which was a very Christian-based, Bible-oriented theory, but he just took that part out, and now it became the theme of liberation from the oppression, whether color, sex, wealth, or political standings. And he actually has a great quote in his book, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, which is one of his most famous works. It's often quoted. But its freedom is acquired by conquest, not by gift. It must be pursued constantly and responsibly. Freedom is not an ideal located outside of the man, nor is it an idea which becomes myth. It is rather the indispensable condition for the quest for human completion. He was given the opportunity while he was working at the high school to implement his theories. He got to work with a group of 300 sugarcane workers that were all illiterate, and he taught them to read in just 45 days. This made the government take notice, but unfortunately there was a coup d'etat and the government was overthrown. This happened in 1964, and Paulo was imprisoned as a traitor because his theories didn't go with the new regime. This was for 70 days. Then he was exiled to Bolivia, after which he moved to Chile. There he began working for the United Nations School of Political Science. Paulo Freire doesn't just have the book Pedagogy of the Oppressed published. That is just his most famous work. He also has Teachers as Cultural Workers, Letters to Those Who Teach, Pedagogy of Hope, many other titles, all very highly quoted in the educational world. Paulo Freire had many careers in his lifetime. In 1947, he was the director of the Department of Education and Cultural of the Social Service, where he worked mainly with, you guessed it, adult illiterates. In 1961, he was the director of the Department of Cultural Extension. In 1969, he was the visiting professor at Harvard University, where he taught the study of development and social change. In 1970, he was an advisor on education at the United Nations in Geneva, Switzerland, where he lived for 9 years. After which he was actually allowed back into Brazil because there was a new regime where they welcomed him, and he joined the Workers' Party in Sao Paulo as the head of the Adult Illiteracy Project. In 1988, he became the Secretary of Education in Sao Paulo. So what is the oppressed? Paulo Freire mentions this a lot throughout his writings and his works. The oppressed are the poor and uneducated. They don't have the drive or the know-how on how to change the world or their current position. And the oppressors are the opposite. The educators, they have the power, they don't want change. One ways that he combated this was cultural circles, which is what the Brazilian government was going to actually implement when they saw his progress with those 300 sugarcane workers. And it's an adult literacy program. The purpose was to assist the poorest people to learn to read and write through helping them respect their everyday language. He believed strongly that when a literate person participates in this sort of educational experience, he comes to a new awareness of self, a new sense of dignity, and he is stirred by a new hope. It was also super important in this time for the Brazilians to learn how to read, because to vote in an election, you actually had to pass a literacy test. Paulo Freire believed that the keys to success in these cultural circles was dialogue, humility, respect, action, and change. He believed in a sense of group empowerment and not just one person learning. Uh, and his theories worked very well. The adult illiterates learned to read and write in just 30 hours of education. And in Nicaragua, illiteracy was reduced from 40% to 13% in just 2 months. Paulo Freire was a strong believer that no matter how ignorant a person was, he could still look critically at the world around him. He demanded change, and he didn't want anyone to participate in the culture of silence or being in the background and not participating in life. Um, for his theories to work, it demanded humility and respect between the teacher. The teacher was no longer a dictator. He needed them to have a class suicide or constant re-examination of self. And there needed to be a constant level of respect and trust between teacher, pupil, and fellow students. This is a quote from his book, Teachers as Cultural Workers, and I hope you read it. It's very good. Paulo Freire had some major theories. Some of them included anti-banking, or just knowledge being bestowed upon the student from the teacher, that being a one-way street. That is not the way education should be, he believed. He believed in praxis, or action, practice, and reflection, not just talking about things, but experiencing them. He wanted an Easter experience, which I talked about earlier, about the teacher constantly re-examining themselves. He also believed strongly in dialogue, constantly talking between teacher and student. Also, what I talked about before, conscientization, the developing of consciousness, critical awareness of one's social reality. Codification was also really important to him, or the gathering of information to build a picture of new understanding. Paulo Freire has actually affected me very deeply. I really like his theories on education, and I plan to implement them in the future when I am teaching. What I didn't like was the fact that it was mostly about adult illiterates. I'm planning on teaching elementary school teachers, so we might need a little bit more of an authoritarian in the classroom then. But I am planning on implementing his theories for when I am a teacher. In conclusion, Paulo Freire has had a huge impact on the world, from his work with adult illiterates to his constant fight against oppression. He truly is an inspirational human being, and I hope his work lives on past this point. Thank you for listening to my presentation. Again, I am Olivia Nelson, and the presentation was about Paulo Freire.